Welcome to another installment of developing web authoring with HTML. I'm your host, Professor Francis Fiske, and let's jump right in. Well, the last class we talked in great length about grids, and in this class we're going to talk in subsequent length about spacing. Now, when we did our grids before, as you can see, I still have the old name of the page up here. We spoke a little bit about calls and how our columns rows that exist in containers can be responsive based on the way that we call our classes in Bootstrap, in the HTML using Bootstrap. But now what I want to do is I want to talk a little bit about spacing both between divs and inside of a div. So let's jump right in, shall we? I'm going to refresh this page because grid.html does not exist anymore. It is now spacing. If you want to follow along, I would implore you to navigate to Git Bootstrap Docs 5.2 utility spacing and use this as your tag along for this class. In this specific documentation, you will find margins and padding, which is something we're going to talk about at great length in this course. All right, back to the material. So in the last class, we talked about responsive design using calls and numerical values based on the number of grid boxes in a grid that exist and things like that. In this class, what I want to go over is how margins and padding can be applied using spacing. So if I wanted to apply a margin to this specific class, let's say I wanted to have some space in between the top and the bottom, right? I don't want this all the way at the top. Well, what I can do is I can come in here and I can say, hey, I want a margin, which means that I want a space outside of my div, right? Not inside. I want space outside of my div based on where the space needs to exist. So if I want space at the top of my div, I can easily say, and if I wanted it on the whole row, all right, not just one div, I can say margin top, all right, MT stands for top, MB stands for bottom, margin, margin left or margin start, margin right or margin E, all right, and then margin left right, MX, margin top bottom, MY. Now in this case, I don't want to get too complicated, so I just want to do margin top, and there are 6 different values that I can give to margin top. I can give it between values of 0 to 5. I can also give it an auto. Now, you might be thinking, what in the hell is auto for? Auto is to align your divs. So text center does not align your div. What text center does is it aligns the text within the div. If you want to make your div center, you have to tell it you want it to have margin auto, and what you'll say is MX auto. Remember what I said about MX? MX means left, right? You're doing them at the same time. If you say MX auto, what you're saying is I want them both to be equal, the same values, so that the actual div sits directly in the middle of the page. In a way, that's what container is already doing. So if I went back here and I actually looked at the code behind, if I looked at the inspect, and I said I wanted to see if this row, right, and I'm gonna see if I can scroll over it so you can see it. Does this row, 1 second, elements, I'm gonna pull this down so I can actually click on that row. So here, that. So this row right here, let's look at that for a second, and I'm gonna actually dock this below, there, and pull it up. Perfect. If you want to get to this inspect, you can right click the page and say inspect, or you can click F11, I'm sorry, not F11, F12, and it will take you to the DevTools. Now you might get a prompt that says, hey, are you sure you want to see DevTools? If you want to see this again and not see the prompt, click this button, do that, right? Because we're going to go into DevTools quite a lot. But either way, let's go click on this and let's look at the row. So the row, the styles for the row appear on the right. But instead of the row itself, I want to see the container. I want to see what the container's alignment, what the alignment for the container is. You can see there's text center, that's the class we put here, and then there's container with the max width of 1320. But if I keep scrolling down, I should be able to see why it's in the middle. Right now I don't see it. Here it is. Margin right, margin left are both auto. Now, remember what I said about Bootstrap? You don't have to write margin right and margin left. Those are CSS styles. We're using Bootstrap to kind of wrap those styles up so we don't have to really learn the styles. We just learn the wrapper. And so if I wanted this margin right, margin left to exist without using the container class, all I have to say is mx-auto, and it would do the same thing. Great. So let's jump back into this, and let's, instead of saying mx, I just want to say margin top. And I want to give it some values. So I'm going to say margin top 1. I'm going to save this, and let's see what happens. So right now, before I refresh the page, margin top is basically 0. You can basically think of this as MT0. MT0 means there's no margin applied whatsoever, or 0 means there's nothing applied whatsoever. And there are situations where you would want to explicitly say, I don't want any margins or paddings in this specific place. Please remove them. But in this case, let's just assume that we don't want this line, we don't want this specific row touching the top of our page. Well, I would say MT1. Let's see what happens. Well, it looks like it moved down a sliver. If I actually look at the code of what's going on right here, you will see that the row now has a margin top of .25 rem. Now, rem is a unit of measurement, just like pixels or inches may be. And what rem does is rem gives us a responsive way of defining a ratio of how far away from a specific thing we want to be or how big we want something to be. If I change this, now the fun fact about this is I don't have to keep going back to the HTML to change what I see in the page. I can do it directly in the page. So if I come in here and double click that class and I say M2, it'll get bigger. Rem went to 0.5. I think you can see a trend here, right? If I go in here and I say, okay, well, I want that to be 3. Now it's gotten bigger. And I can go all the way up to 5. 5 is the largest I can go up to before the sizes kind of don't matter anymore. So I can go to 5, and now I'm at rem 3. If I do 6, what happens? Nothing, because I can't go above 5. The only other value I can put in here is auto. Now, if I put auto in here, what do you think will happen? Well, nothing. Because we said auto for the top, but we didn't say auto for the bottom. So nothing's going to happen. It's going to say, oh, well, you know, I guess it needs to stay the same. If I wanted to have an auto for top and bottom, what I would have to say is MY. And like I said, check your documentation. In the spacing, you're going to need that. It's going to help you out quite a lot. This is going to jump down, so I don't know how far down it may jump. Oh, it didn't jump at all, but you can see how margin top and margin bottom kind of showed up here. And I think it didn't jump because of the container. So if I actually put this on the container instead of the row, what would happen? Nothing, which is good. That's actually really good. I don't want this to move at all. I want it to stay where it is. The container and the row have its own margins and paddings that kind of modify the way we want things to look. And that's how margins work. Margins change the spacing outside of your element. Margins do not change the spacing within your element. Now you might be asking, what in the hell are you talking about? What spacing within the element? Well, let's look at where this text is, right? The text exists within this box, this 50% ratioed box using our call6 responsive class on the first division or the first div. Well, what if we wanted more space around this word? We didn't want the margins or the padding inside of it to be so close. Well, I would need to come in here and change the padding. Now, how would I do that? I would use P instead of M, and everything else applies. So if I said P top 3, like I did for the margin top 3, what would happen? The top of the top now has a padding of the same margin, or of the same rem, I should say, not margin. That margin had 1 rem. Now, this code exists within your Bootstrap files, and if you ever wanted to change the ratios of how the rem worked, you could. But in this class, we're not going to do that. We're just going to use whatever ratios exist within Bootstrap itself because they're fairly close to what most people want. In this case, I don't really want padding just on the top. I want padding on the top and the bottom. So if I want padding on the top and the bottom, what should I use? Y. Correct. I want to use Y. If I use Y, I get padding on the top and the bottom of column. Now notice I'm only applying padding to the first div, which means that all other divs will not inherit those styles because they're not children of each other. These two divs do not inherit from this div. They sit in the same div. If I put this py3 on the row, however, all the divs would inherit the same style. Or not. That's funny. What just happened? It looks like a margin was applied, but a margin was not applied. Notice that BG danger does not exist on the row. It exists on each of the divs that sit in the row, right? That sit in the div that has the class row. So let's go ahead and remove BG danger from all of these classes, or all, I'm sorry, let's remove the BG danger class from all of the children rows, and let's add it up here. Look what just happened. All the styles, all the rows within this, or all the columns in this row inherited BG danger. But notice something very interesting. The divs within the row are still as skinny as possible. And the row itself is what has the margin of py3. Do you see how this inheritance is working? It's quite nice, actually. And once again, margins and padding have the same applications for numbers and auto, as well as left, right, start, end, SE, top, bottom, which is X. I'm sorry, top, bottom, which is left, right, and left, right, which is, I'm sorry, left, right, which is X, top, bottom, which is Y. Now, this is really the crux of how padding and margin work. And I don't want to get too deep into this right now because we're going to be using padding and margins as we progress in this class, and I want to build on the content that I just gave you. I want to keep these videos very, very slender. So what I will tell you is, if you want more information on spacing, I would implore you once again to go to the Bootstrap's documentation and use it as a rubric so that you can get where you want to be. Otherwise, as I say in all of my classes, good luck, have fun, ciao.